Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. This is the post-sprint race reaction for the Belgium sprint race. What was your thoughts on this sprint race? I know we had a nice long delay because of the weather to even start this sprint race, and once we actually did get started, it was behind a safety car. Now, due to the safety car and the drying conditions, that track was drying up fairly quickly, and so we had a nice chaos in the pit lane once the safety car came in, due to those people trying to get off those wet tires and onto the intermediates fairly quickly. We also had a little bit of chaos with Alonso dropping out and Perez dropping out early on this race, which shifted up some of the backfield people in this sprint race. But overall, what did you think? Did it meet your expectations? Did it make it more exciting, or was it less exciting than other sprint races we've had this year? I think it's probably on a little bit of a plus side. I think it gave us a little bit more action in this sprint race than we normally see. But what was your thoughts? I will go through the back of the grid to the front of the grid as normal, trying to describe each driver as I go through my thoughts on overall the sprint race. So to start us off, we will start with Alonso, who didn't have a very good qualifying session, them getting out in the wrong timing, and so he ended up qualifying 15th. And he dropped out fairly quickly on lap 3 of this race due to hitting the curb, which was really wet and made him spin out and hit the wall. This caused a safety car after the safety car start, which bunched up the field, and that gave Max a better opportunity to pass Oscar than he normally would have had. Now, we'd have passed Oscar probably due to the performance out of that Red Bull, but it made it a little bit quicker in this regard. But overall, Alonso dropping out, he wasn't too devastated because starting out 15th, he didn't think he was going to get into the point range anyway. So, and it didn't really damage that Aston Martin when he spun off. So I think he was not excited, but really wasn't sad about leaving this sprint race. Now, Sergio, on the other hand, he was dropping back in the field and then had some contact with Hamilton that ended up messing up that side pod on that vehicle, and they could not proceed any further. So he ended up dropping out on lap 9. Now, that contact is a little controversial because some people say that it was, Hamilton's fault, and some people say it was just a driving incident. I probably go on along the lines of it's a driving incident. I think Hamilton was up alongside him during this process, and yes, he did hit the curb that was wet that pushed him out and into Perez, but I don't think that was intentional, and I don't think that was necessarily Hamilton's fault in regard. I think it was more the weather conditions that would pushed him into that condition. Now, did Hamilton should know better? That's a question, I guess, that everyone needs to answer. Anyway, Hamilton got a 5-second penalty for that contact with Perez, and that put Perez out of this sprint race. Now, I don't think Perez would have actually done very well because he was already dropping back into the field during this process. But anyway, Perez dropped from 8th down to 19th. Now, Yuki Tsunoda lost 2 spots from that pit strategy. They were coming in and didn't get the best pit stop to come in, so he lost those positions there and basically did not gain those through the rest of this sprint race, the 11 laps that they had left. And the kind of same thing with kind of Nico. Nico boxed early, and then he lost those positions and really could not gain anything more. So he went from 20th up to 17th. Logan Sargent actually was not doing a good as well, dropping from 13th down to 16th. He did lose 4 spots at the beginning of the race due to those pitting conditions where he pitted and lost positions in the pit, and then could not maintain that, and actually ended up getting a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, which dropped him back farther. So even though he was doing decently, he just wasn't his day overall. Guan Yu Zhou actually spun out on the siding lap, and so that dropped him back in that field, and he lost a spot as well in that pit strategy near the beginning. So not a great day for Juan Yu Zhou, even though he ended up in 15th over that 19th starting position. Kevin Magnussen dropped a position, and those hosses just aren't very well designed for these kind of conditions, it looks like, because both of those hosses were back in that pack overall this whole weekend. And they kind of messed up on some of their strategy in the qualifying sessions as well. So they were farther back than they should have been, but I don't think those hosses would have actually gone up any farther in the grid than they were already at in the sprint race. So that's where Kevin ended up in 14th. Valtteri ended up doing a decent job, coming in from 17th all the way to 13th. He did gain 3 spots in that pit chaos at the very beginning of the race and basically maintain that position. You could see him passing, Checo when Checo was dropping back through the field. But over than that, it's pretty standard race for Valtteri. Alex Albon ended up where he was in 12th. He did lose one position in that pit strategy, but then was able to regain that later in the race. So a decent job from Williams, even though that's not where they wanted to be during this sprint race. They thought they could be farther up due to those high-speed straightaways. So we will see if they can do anything better tomorrow in the actual GP race. Lance Stroll came in from 14th up to 11th. He did have some battles throughout this race, but ended up in 11th overall, so a decent increase for him. And that brings us to the top 10, where we had Daniel Ricciardo, which was a really good run for him after his poor showing in the qualifying session for the GP. Coming in from 11th up to 10th, not quite into the points, but actually showing a little bit more what he can do, and that AlphaTauri can actually perform decently, even though it's not great. So hopefully he can show some of that in the GP race, coming back from the back of the pack up to hopefully maybe points or not in the GP race tomorrow. Ocon's another one of these that came in at the same spot he qualified in. He did lose a position in the pits and was able to regain that because of Perez, putting him back into that 9th position. Then we get to the point scoring positions of where George Russell ended up from 10th up to 8th. He had a pretty good run, passing Ricciardo on lap 10 for that 8th position and be able to push forward and almost lose that position to Lewis as he was able to have that 5-second penalty for Lewis. So didn't quite gain enough time on his teammate to swap those positions, but overall decent run from George, but not really the great run that they wanted to have overall. Lewis was actually doing really well, I think, coming back from that 7th position. He was up there fighting for that podium behind Pierre Gasly, but due to that 5-second penalty, he dropped back into the 7th position where he started off with. And then we have Lando, who started off in 5th and dropped down to 6th. He lost a couple positions on that pit strategy where they brought him in late and did not get him into the right positioning for that pit strategy. So he kind of dropped back and had to kind of work his way back up into that 6th position. Where the same thing kind of happens with the Ferraris, who were in 4th and 3rd and ended up in 5th and 4th overall. The Ferraris actually did fairly good, but that pit strategy kind of hurt them when they brought those Ferraris in to the pits between the rest of the field. But we're able to gain some of those positions back. I have him that Charles Leclerc passed Perez on lap 7 for 6th. And the same thing for Charles Leclerc that passed Perez on lap 7 for 5th. That's where Perez was dropping back into that clutches and then ended up dropping out of the race altogether. And then we have Pierre Gasly, who was fantastically in that Alpine, ended up in 3rd with that excellent pit stop and that strategy to get him in and out ahead of the rest of the field, gaining those 3 positions right off the bat. And he was able to maintain those. Even though he was 4 seconds behind Oscar Piastri, He was doing a really good job in that Alpine, I think, and just maintaining that. I know he had a fight with Lewis near the end where Lewis was trying to pass him, but was able to maintain that third position overall. And then we have Oscar, who did an excellent job. He had a good start on the very beginning of the race, and so he was in second place, and then the pit stop strategy, he ended up coming into the pits and gaining that first position due to the pit lane, getting them out in time to get ahead of Max, and was doing a fairly decent job in that first position until that safety car came out, which bunched up the field. And then Max did an excellent job on his pass on Oscar Piastri, but that did help him out a little bit where he was bunched up for that restart, which then made it a lot easier for Max to get around Oscar Piastri. He probably would have gotten around Oscar Piastri anyway, but it did just help in bunching up the field again for that restart. And then Max, of course, started us off in that first position, by the 1100th second, 1100 points, whatever. In that first position, stayed in that first position, even though he got pushed back into the second position due to the pit stop strategy. He didn't, have any issues with that. He thought that was still the right call and was able to pass Oscar, and then ended up in a 6.677 lead over Oscar. So it was fairly handedly that he was going to be passing that McLaren anyway. And with that, he is showing his dominance and how well he is performing with that Red Bull overall. So there was no shot for Oscar in the overall race, but it was still nice to see Oscar Piastri actually lead some laps in a race and end up having a podium, which is good. It's not considered a true race, I guess, but it's still good to see him up there on that podium. Now we come to the driver standings, and so we have Max still at 289 points in the lead. And what we see is that Carlos Sainz passes George Russell by 1 point, and we see Oscar Piastri jumping up to 10th position over Esteban Ocon. And for the constructors, it stays the same, with Red Bull with 460 points over their next rival, with Mercedes with 226. We see McLaren moving up, and we also see Alpine gain a little bit on McLaren as well because of their results. But overall, the same constructor standings as we saw before, and we'll see if that changes any during the GP race. So next, we still have the Belgium GP race tomorrow. So if you want to hear more about that, you can subscribe to this channel. Or if you made it this far, I'd appreciate a like on this video. Until then, I will see you on the grid, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.